the lawyer of any of them, meaning I owe the duty of care to any of them, then my professional ability, if I may use that word, to represent the Gambia government in a commission of inquiry is not affected. In other words, it is the same interest. All public interests align. So that's why there is no conflict.
Okay. let's look at it this way. The legal notice number 15 of 2017, which is MOJ2, highlights that there are reports on anomalies within certain institutions. One of those institutions being Social Security and Housing Finance. And the inquiry was meant to subject those institutions to it. Right now, don't you believe that a conflict a conflict exists where you, in one breath, are representing an institution of government trying to recover monies from third parties, and in another breath, government is doing an internal check on itself, because the subjects of the commission was not only Jammeh and his associates. Some of the institutions of government were also subject to the commission, and you were required to interrogate those institutions. Now, wouldn't an interest be inherent from the beginning, where you were required to look into these institutions, one of them being your client?
The Commission of Inquiry, the legal notice number 17 of 13 July 2017, was not a commission of inquiry on parastatals. It is quite specific as to what the commission of inquiry was about from the first paragraph that you mentioned, the recital. And it says, preliminary reports received from inter alia, the Central Bank of the Gambia, Social Security and Housing Finance Corporation, Gambia Ports Authority, Gambia Telecommunications Company Limited, National Electricity Company Limited, Assets Management and Recovery Corporation, Gambia National Petroleum Corporation, and other public institutions and government sources indicate that substantial funds were either directly or indirectly withdrawn, paid out, or expended on instructions or directives received from the Office of the President during the tenure in office of former President Jammeh. And it goes on. So the commission was about the financial dealings between those public enterprises.
But
and
if I may interject.
So please let me finish, otherwise I will lose the trend of my answer. So the commission of inquiry was focused. It was not a commission on the operations of public enterprises. It was a commission on financial activities between those public enterprises and ex-President Yahya Jammeh. One. Secondly, I was not an employee of Social Security. I was external counsel, and I dealt with matters referred to me, which would be specific. Depending on, as you see, one of them is an example, recover monies for us, perhaps prepare an agreement for us. So I was not an employee of Social Security. So as I said, Social Security is a public enterprise. It's a public enterprise over which the government has supervisory authority to ensure that the public enterprises operates properly. So if the government is setting up an inquiry about a certain aspect of the dealings of the enterprise, obviously those dealings would be questionable dealings and would be inconsistent, it is assumed, would be inconsistent with the objectives or the mandate of that enterprise. And that's why they are being investigated. So if the government appoints me, who is an external counsel of Social Security and Finance Corporation, there is no conflict, because I'm going to be representing the government's interest in this matter to find out whether what happened was wrong. Just as if I am the lawyer of Social Security, or when I'm the lawyer of Social Security, I represent Social Security, not any employee. I represent Social Security and its interests. So I have the best interest. I am expected to have the best interest of Social Security at heart, as I am being required by government to actually uphold that best interest. So that's why the interest of government in protecting Social Security aligns with my interest as external counsel who asks for Social Security and is expected to, in other words, protect the interests of Social Security. And that's why I said to you, in my discussions with the Attorney General, there was no apparent conflict, meaning on the face of it, there was no conflict of interest. But it was possible that down the line, we may come across a transaction in which I may be conflicted. And in that case, we will deal with it when the matter arose. And that is why you will realize that with regard to Social Security, a second lawyer was hired was retained, not hired, was engaged by the Attorney General to cover certain aspects of the investigation relating to Social Security because of my involvement. And that's why Mr. Bachili was engaged to cover certain aspects. So that is what was agreed. So we were very much alive. As lawyers, we are always alive to conflicts of interest, and the matter was addressed upfront between me and the Attorney General.
Okay. I would like us to look at the legal notice again. Because whilst the first paragraph, the first recital, would not give us the context as to why the commission was set up and the scope of its authority, I would like to look at the scope of the commission's authority, and you find that on the second page under the operative part. Let's look at paragraph 21B. Paragraph 21B should be on page 3, at the top of page 3. And it says to give it context, let me read the entirety of the provision. It says, 2 is the authority of the commission. 1 is the commission is authorized to. B is to inquire into and investigate the involvement of the executive arm of government under the former president in the withdrawal and application of funds or resources of public bodies, enterprises, offices, and then it goes on to C. My question is, the legal notice itself envisions, technical, is my mic in order? Yes, the legal notice itself envisions that you will be looking into the activities of public bodies at the time the former president, during the tenure of the former president. Wouldn't you call this an apparent, wouldn't this appear as an apparent conflict if you have to look into the affairs of a client that you are representing actively in court at the time?
No. It wouldn't be a conflict, as I explained. Firstly, let me correct something. The recital is actually what gives context. It's a recital that gives you the background. That's why it's a preamble. And it gives you a background as to the setting up of the commission. And the paragraph that you have mentioned, which is the commission is authorized to then you refer to B, inquire into and investigate the involvement of the executive arm of government under former President Jammeh in the withdrawal and applications of funds or resources of public bodies, enterprise, and offices. So the commission was not on the activities of public enterprises. It was limited in general. It was limited to the funds, the financial dealings, if any, between the former president, or his office when he was in charge, and these public enterprises. So the Commission of Inquiry was set up to give it context, or to perhaps elaborate more on the context. Was set up because the government that followed the government of the former president came to the conclusion that something had gone wrong insofar as the former president and his dealings with those the public enterprises that I mentioned is concerned. And the commission was targeted at investigating those activities. I am external counsel. I represent Social Security I represented Social Security of those that were listed, Social Security and GAMTEL. The interest of Gambia government aligns with the interest of the public enterprises.
How so?
Because
can we zero into the interest?
Yes, the interest. Exactly.
Because I would contend with you on that.
The public enterprises were established. They're called public enterprises because they are all established by statutory authority or emanate from statutory authority, established for the public interest, to carry out a function that is public. They report to government, they are supervised by government, even if they are companies and they have shares. The shares are entirely held by government, as in the case of GAMTEL and GAMSEL. So these public enterprises, in common language, are owned by government. They are part of government. Since they are owned by government and are part of government, their interest is the interest of government. And that's why government is able to set up an inquiry over their activities. They are not private, they are public. And that's why the interests are the same. The interests of all public bodies are the same as the interests of government. They are all set up for the public interest. They are one and the same. That is why that's what I mean by alignment. Now, for in conflict of interest to arise, the interests have to be in opposition. They have to be adverse. So if I was a lawyer for any of the companies that are being investigated, I cannot, there would be conflict of interest because I couldn't be lawyer for the other side.
Let me ask a question.
Why did
you recuse yourself along the line?
I did not recuse myself along the line generally. I recused myself with regard to certain specific parts of the investigation.
And Social Security was one of them?
No, I did not recuse myself generally from Social Security investigation. As regards Social Security, I recused myself from two matters. Now, Social Security owned two companies, and these companies were
Oh, by the way, your evidence is for the committee. I am just a conduit to ask questions.
That is apparent, but
so
obviously
you could go on.
Thank you for reminding me.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I did not recuse myself generally on Social Security matters. I recused myself on specific aspects of the Social Security matter. There were two of them. The first one, Social Security owns Ocean Bay and Sun Beach. When we came to investigate Ocean Bay and Sun Beach, it was realized that both hotels were leased. They were leased out to two companies. These were private companies or foreign companies. And before the commission had started, a year before the commission had started, Social Security had instructed us to sue those two companies to recover the hotel from them because they were not paying rent. So my office had instituted action on the instructions of Social Security through Ocean Bay. We had started action against those two companies. So I specifically wrote to the chairman of the commission to draw their attention to the fact that my office was already in a case against those two companies. And it would not be fair for us to investigate the same two companies as regards the lease they had with Ocean Bay, because those two companies can claim that we are being biased against them. So I recuse myself specifically on the investigation of the lease between Ocean Bay and Sun Beach and those companies. That is what I recuse ourselves, because our firm was already representing Ocean Bay and Sun Beach in a case against the two companies to evict them. And now the commission was going to investigate those leases, how those leases came about. So we recuse ourselves. The second aspect on which we recuse ourselves, and another lawyer, that's the same lawyer, was asked to investigate, to work with the commission to investigate, was on the acquisition or on the renovation of Ocean Bay. Gambia Social Security acquired Ocean Bay. And when Social Security acquired Ocean Bay, my firm, and this was early in the 2000s, my firm had signed I think it was, we were involved. I think we had signed the agreement. I think it was the construction or renovation agreement between Ocean Bay and I think it was Lali Diab. So because we signed, we recused ourselves. So two matters relating to Social Security, only we recused ourselves. And this was in relation to those two hotels owned by Ocean Bay Hotel. In fact, they were companies, but they are companies wholly owned by Social Security. That's Ocean Bay and Sun Beach, and also the renovation of Ocean Bay and Sun Beach. And so this is an example of specific transactions which we were involved in as lawyers for Social Security. And when we came to them, we recused ourselves. But as far as Social Security is concerned, generally, there was no conflict of interest in a general manner. I hope members of the committee understand, but I can explain further.
Sure, I'm sure the members will probe on that later. I want to ask, at the point at which the discussions were being held for you to assume the role of lead counsel, are you telling the committee that that conflict, however slight it might have been, was not foreseen?
No. You remember? No, it wasn't. That's the question. That's the answer. And if I may explain.
Please do.
If you look at the terms of reference, there's nothing specific about it. It's an investigation.
Which terms of reference?
I'll exhibit
the commission
MOJ2.
Okay.
MOJ2, the Commission of Inquiry Terms of Reference. My services were being engaged to conduct an inquiry. Nobody knew what the inquiry would bring. We were at the beginning of the inquiry. Just like, I suppose now, you are at the beginning of an inquiry. You don't know what the inquiry will bring. So that is why I raised the fact that, well, we are lawyers for Social Security, and we were terminated for a while, but they brought us back sometime around May. They started giving us work again. So I drew that fact to the attention of the AG, that we were lawyers for Social Security, and we were lawyers for Gamtel and Gamtel. But nevertheless, we agreed that since the interest of government aligns with the interest of this public enterprise, because whatever harm, some harm is expected to have been done, and that is the harm the government is trying to investigate. That's what the Commission of Inquiry is about. But the details were not known at that stage. So we agreed that since there is no apparent conflict of interest, because the interests of government and the interests of PEs are the same, public enterprise are the same. However, if during the course of the investigation any matter arises in which there is a conflict of interest, then we would discuss it and the proper steps would be taken. So obviously, as at the beginning of the commission, we could not know what would come up. And therefore, your answer is no, there was no apparent conflict of interest.
Thank you. Well, I agree with you that the interests of government and its institutions would naturally be one, but that's in a general sense, of course. But looking at the specific instance we find ourselves in, and you yourself have mentioned that the government believed that there was harm. I believe that's the word you used, harm done in some of the institutions. Now, this harm, if we look at it, perhaps I take you back to MOJ2, specifically back to the same clause, that is 2. Let's look at 2 sub 1 3. The Commission is authorized to identify institutions, persons, and groups of persons directly involved in payments, withdrawals, and applications of sums. And then I had read B, but let me continue reading B from where I stopped. It goes on to say enterprises, offices, or projects included but not limited to social security and housing corporation. Gambia Ports Authority goes on to list them and say, and 2, ascertain whether applicable policies and procedures were followed. That's 1. Ascertain whether the funds or resources withdrawn or applied were properly applied to budgeted or lawful purposes. Identify the institutions, persons, and groups of persons directly involved in the withdrawal and application of the said funds or resources. Right? I'll stop there and go back to Roman numeral I, which says ascertain whether applicable policies and procedures were followed. If we begin with that, having in mind that what the Commission is authorized to do is to identify institutions, persons, etc. Now, the Social Security has been identified by the legal notice already, and this would have been known to the AG. I'm not sure whether that was discussed with you, but from your answers, it would have been known to you as well, that you were supposed to look at the harm that was done during the former president's time. And in looking at that harm, you ought to have looked at the policies and procedures of all these institutions. Now, in delving into those, like you said, the evidence could have taken you anywhere. In my mind, or rather to my mind, that's a red flag that should have been discussed. And it's clear that you raised it, and it was looked at.
Sorry, what is the question?
My question is coming. I'm trying to give you context. To my mind, that is a red flag, Mrs. Bensouda, because while you have admitted that you didn't know where the evidence would take you at the beginning, or rather the setting up of the commission, it is apparent that you would have had to look at Social Security and other clients of yours, or other former clients, and look at their policies, procedures, ascertain whether the funds or resources were withdrawn or applied, were properly applied, or rather were applied improperly, identify institutions, persons, and groups of persons directly involved in those withdrawals and applications of funds and resources. Now, of course, it is apparent that down the line, the conflict was realized and you recused yourself. My question is, it is apparent why it was not apparent to you or the Attorney General or the Ministry of Justice that this conflict would indeed arise at some point in the tenure of the Commission.
Thank you, Council. Firstly, Mr. Chairman, there was no red flag. I was certain that I had never represented former President Jammeh in any form, and I had never represented any of his companies in any form. There would have been a red flag if I had represented any of them. So the first question to be answered, when, for instance, Mr. Chair, if you instruct me to take Honorable Jammeh to court, the first thing you would like to know is my relationship with Honorable Jammeh. That is simple. So if I have a relationship with Honorable Jammeh, perhaps he's my cousin, or perhaps I had worked for him before, that's a red flag. Because I cannot represent you, you cannot expect me to represent you in all good faith and honesty when I have a relationship with him. So the first question was whether there was anything preventing me from investigating the former President Jammeh or his family. That is the primary conflict. And if I had in any way represented them, then the conflict would be apparent. Even there, we would have to discuss in what way I had represented them, and that representation would prevent me from investigating him. So, as far as my representation of Social Security is concerned, in any way, there was no apparent conflict, there was no red flag. But this is a wide-ranging investigation, and I have been in practice for 40 years. Presumably, during a period of 22 years that I have represented Social Security, there might be a transaction that we come across that I cannot investigate because I was involved in one way or the other. So that was the discussion. So we agreed, yes, on the face of the terms of reference, issues to be investigated are wide-ranging, but all of them are about the dealing between the public enterprise and former President Jammeh, or his family, or his associates. At this time, we did not even know who his associates were, because they had not yet been identified. They were not identified by the terms of reference. So there was no apparent conflict whatsoever. And that is why the discussion then, we concluded that since it was a wide-ranging investigation, if conflict arises, as is expected, we are professionals. The Attorney General is an experienced lawyer. I had been in practice by that time for over 30 years. The chairperson of the commission is the oldest lawyer in the profession. So the conclusion that was arrived at is, yes, there is no apparent conflict, absolutely, because my representation of parastatals is what gave me an advantage, and that is why the Attorney General thought I was probably the most appropriate person to approach, because I understood how they operated. My representation of parastatals aligns with government interests. Government interest is the same as PE interest, as considered to by my learned friend. So there's nothing in these terms of reference of the commission that raised any red flag. So, but we agreed, if in due course any transaction was being looked at, which suggests that I was involved in the transaction between the parastatal and His Excellency Yahya Jammeh, or an associate of Yahya Jammeh, then I would recuse myself. Now, it happened that in those cases that I mentioned, in the case of Ocean Bay, the foreign company that the hotel was leased to, the commission found out that these were companies working with the former President Yahya Jammeh. And so they were named close associates. And since we were already in court with them, still on behalf of Social Security, it was not fair that I then became the lawyer to investigate them, because I was already in court with them on behalf of Social Security. As regards the other aspects, it became clear that when the contractor was awarded the contract to renovate Ocean Bay, my firm prepared the document. That was around, I think, late 1990 something. So since my firm prepared it, the commission said, okay, we will retain. As I said, and as I have repeated, representing public enterprise and representing government are the same. And that is why the Attorney General is able to represent any public body. Even though he's the Attorney General, the legal advisor, and lawyer for the state, he is able to step in and represent any public body. It's because the interests are the same.
Yes, I would say once more that I agree that generally the interests are the same. But in this specific instance where you're investigating public bodies, and they were investigated, Ms. Bensouda, because the commission itself reported on Social Security. Social Security was one of the bodies that were extensively investigated. You would agree with me?
Social Security and housing, none of the PEs were investigated generally. They were investigated only as to their dealings with former President Jammeh. And Social Security was no exception. Only those transactions, only those issues which involved former president were investigated. Nothing else was investigated for all of them, only because that was the mandate of the commission. And a commission cannot go outside its mandate.
Precisely, that was the mandate of the commission. Yes. And as a matter of fact, Social Security was investigated.
That's what I'm saying, as to his dealing, not generally investigated.
Of course. I understand that, and I believe the committee understands that very well.
Yes.
That within the scope and mandate of the commission, Social Security was investigated. That is the fact.
Social Security, I'll repeat, Social Security was not generally investigated.
I did not say generally.
No, let me just say, because it has to be qualified. That Social Security was investigated. The dealings between Social Security and former President Jammeh is what was investigated.
Would I be right to say that within the scope of the mandate of the commission, Social Security was investigated?
The mandate of the commission was to investigate the dealings between parastatals and former President Jammeh, and that is precisely what was investigated. There would only have been a conflict of interest if I had been lawyer for President Jammeh. But since I never served, I never represented him in any manner, then I was competent to investigate the dealings between the parastatals and former President Jammeh.
My question was, within the scope of the commission's mandate, Social Security was investigated. Isn't that correct?
Yes, as regards the commission's dealing with former President Jammeh. I want to be precise.
I believe I have been precise to say within the mandate of the commission, you investigated
then we are saying the same thing, Council.
I believe we were saying the same thing from
Thank you.
5 minutes ago.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And as a matter of fact, those two companies, Ocean Bay and Sun Beach, were subsidiaries of Social Security at the time you were taking that appointment.
Yeah. They could be described as subsidiaries. They were totally owned by Social Security.
Okay. They were owned by...
They are totally, wholly owned by Social Security.
Fair enough. They were owned by Social Security at the time you were taking your appointment.
Yes.
And you knew them to be your clients once upon a time.
They were my clients and they remain my clients during the period of the commission.
And in fact, by the time you were taking your appointment letter, Social Security, and which would also extend to those two hotels, were your clients.
Sorry, say that again. At
the time you were taking up your appointment as lead counsel, Social Security was your client. You said yes to that. I'm extending it to the other two companies.
At the time we took up this appointment, yes, our retainer with Social Security had been terminated, but they had given us instruction. They had instructed us on various matters, and
yes,
SSC1 was one of them. Now, that doesn't change anything. As regards Ocean Bay and Sun Beach, we were their lawyers as at the time of the commission.
Okay, that's my question.
Yes, but it doesn't change anything because We were lawyers for Ocean Bay and Social Security, because Ocean Bay and Sun Beach, because they were owned by Social Security.
Yes.
So the interest of Social Security aligns with the interests of their subsidiaries, obviously, and that is why we were able to represent them. So it doesn't, nothing changes by the fact that they are subsidiaries. In other words, that's what I want to say.
Okay, thank you. So they were subsidiaries of Social Security at the time, and you were representing all three institutions, correct? So that is Social Security and the two hotels.
We were representing the two hotel companies. We were their lawyers. We never ceased to be their lawyers. As I said, for Social Security, our retainer was terminated in around 2010, and then in 2017, Social Security started giving us work again. Yes, so we were representing Social Securities in certain matters. Yes.
Council, please can we stand down for 5 minutes? I'll be back.
That's fine.
Because we don't have quorum. Yeah. All right. Thank you. We resume, Council. You can proceed.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Ms. Bensouda, I know it was a short break, but I'm obliged to just remind you that you're on oath. Before the break, the point of discussion was your retainership with 2 companies and your engagement with Social Security. And I had asked that at the time, or you had made clear that at the time you were offered the position of lead counsel, you were acting for Social Security, even though, to be fair to you, your answer was that in a limited capacity and in the same interest with the government. And you were also retained by its 2 subsidiaries. Now, my question would be, looking at MOJ2, wouldn't it be apparent, looking at the mandate of the Commission, that it was inevitable that your 2 retained clients would be looked into and automatically a conflict would have arisen? And also that you were representing Social Security in a matter where you were recovering funds for them, and that would also be a conflict. Wasn't that apparent?
There is no conflict, as I said, with my representing Social Security or its subsidiaries in any capacity whatsoever. There would be a conflict where this would be a conflict relating to perhaps subject matter, because conflict comes in various ways. If I had represented Social Security in a transaction with former President Jammeh, for instance, in as much as there would be no apparent conflict, but in relation to that transaction, relation to that transaction, it is better I recuse myself, because I may not be independent since I dealt with that transaction. So it's possible that I'm not conflicted as far as Social Security is concerned, but when it came to a particular transaction with President Jammeh, I was involved, and therefore I should recuse myself from that investigating that transaction. But as I said, happily, I knew as a fact when I had my discussion with the Attorney General, and it was one of the first things, that I had never in any way represented knowingly former President Jammeh or his family members or any of his companies, never. So that was the main question of conflict. Once that was resolved, there was nothing else to resolve. Nothing. Even if I had represented Social Security to sue the president or his companies, that's not conflict. I'm still representing Social Security's interests. So I can represent Social Security's interest in any form, directly or indirectly. I can represent government insofar as Social Security is concerned in any form, directly or indirectly. All those interests are aligned. They are all public. So no apparent conflicts could arise. However, during the course of investigation, possible, because this is a big investigation. We investigate so many parastatals, so many transactions. So it's possible we come across transactions in which I was involved, and in that case, I cannot investigate those transactions. And it happened that we came across transactions I could not independently be seen to investigate. And that's why another lawyer was taken. So conflict was not an issue. As I said, Mr. Chairman, conflict is a threshold issue for all lawyers. Every day a new client comes and wants you to do something. The first thing you're obliged to do is do what we call a conflict check. Are you able to take this work? You have to check that. Is there anything relating to this matter which prevents me from taking it? If he's my relative, if the person you want me to sue is my relative, obviously, close relative at that. But it's even possible that I represented him, but in something that is so irrelevant that you, the client, it's the client for the client to decide that I'm comfortable. Please, you can go ahead and take my case. You have explained, but I'm happy for you to do my case. So I had a discussion with the minister, it was the client, and we discussed possibility of conflict. We agreed that there was no apparent conflict. If I had not represented Jammeh in any way, there was no apparent conflict. However, if conflict should arise in any matter, I would recuse myself. And that is what happened.
I would move on from the point of conflict and move on to the commencement after you had just been appointed. But before I do, Ms. Ben, I would like to tap into your experience in public service. You see, one of the key considerations government is saddled with is public interest and public perception. And especially the latter, public perception. Where I would like to know whether that was a consideration for you before you took on this job, because you clearly had dealings with some of the subjects, some of what would be the subjects of the commission. Now, wasn't it important at the time for both you and the ministry to safeguard that public image, to say, since you had dealings with them, perhaps you are not the best person to take up the role of lead counsel?
I don't understand the question, to be honest. And the question is nuanced, and I don't quite understand what you're getting at. As I said, it's
since
like
you don't understand, I can come back and ask it.
You can, yes.
Right. Public perception is chief amongst the considerations, or should have been chief amongst the considerations when government is appointing officials such as yourself in 2017. Would you agree with me on that?
Public perception has never been a consideration. Perhaps it might be, but in my experience, public perception has never been a consideration when I accept or do not accept any engagement with any public body or enterprise.
And my question was not that it was your consideration, but for the government. And before I asked my question, I did say I would like to tap into your experience in public service. And I would ask the question again, that public perception is or ought to have been a criteria or a consideration in 2017 when appointing officials such as yourself. Would you agree?
I don't think it's a yes and no answer. I was not in government at that time. Perhaps the considerations that will exercise the mind of the Attorney General may be different from the considerations that will exercise my mind as a private legal practitioner. Perhaps this is a question that's better answered by the Attorney General, to be honest.
That's a fair answer. I would give you that. That's a fair answer. And perhaps I would put it from the perspective of the committee that public perception should have been a key consideration, because the buy-in of the public was a crucial factor in transition, is a crucial factor in transitional justice, the trust of the public. And here we are. The government has appointed a lead counsel whose firm, who's the managing director of a firm that took a receiver, the receiver that was appointed by the government, to court during the same period. Now, from the lens of a public servant or the citizenry, this could be seen as a conflict. Would you not agree? Technical, please. IT, if we can make sure that the witness's mic is in order and avoid further delay.
My answer is no. Public conflict is not a hypothetical matter. It's a real ethical issue. Happily for us, the Commission of Inquiry is over, it's done. The Commission has carried out its work. I carried out the work for which I was engaged. The Commission concluded, submitted its reports, its photos. So perceptions after, with due respect, 6 years afterwards, is certainly, to my mind, not important. What is important is that from the time I was appointed and for the 18 months the commission sat, no subject of investigation, of all the witnesses we call, of all the close associates that were declared, of all the persons that went to court to challenge the commission, not a single one of them raised the issue of conflict. Conflict is real. If any of them felt that I was conflicted in any manner that was prejudicial to the work the commission was doing, they ought to have raised it. They would have raised it, because so many people were affected. Adverse findings were made against many people, but not a single person who was a subject matter of investigation raised the issue of conflict. Conflict was raised, unfortunately, by the secretary. And he raised it at a time.
We'll get to that, yes.
Sorry, let me answer my question. So we're talking about perception. Apart from the secretary, not a single person raised the issue of conflict. So perception cannot be in hindsight. Perception has to be real and it has to be contemporaneous. At no time during the period of the commission did anything from the public, anything emanate, any concern emanate from the public or from any person who was a subject of investigation of my role or my competence or my capacity to be lead counsel of the commission. So the question of perception is academic, with respect.
And with respect, Ms. Bensouda, I would contend with you. I would seriously disagree with you on that. Although I would state unequivocally that myself and this committee, neither myself nor this committee, is questioning your role, your competence, or your professionalism, now or even at the time. But I would say that perception, even if it comes a decade after, matters. Public perception. Because this is an endeavor of government. This is an initiative government had put in place, not only to recover monies that were misappropriated during a 22-year regime, but also to restore public confidence in a system, to ensure that the public are aware of all the anomalies that occurred within that 22-year regime. Now, if that process is tainted in any shape or form, even if it's 10 years after, I would contend that that is a key consideration, and that needs to be at the back of the mind of cabinet, especially when it's setting up such institutions. You see, I say this not in vain, but because we're sitting in the National Assembly, a committee of a National Assembly, I would direct your mind to Section 102E of the Constitution. And 102E, if I may read, for the record, states, in addition to the other powers conferred on the National Assembly by this Constitution or any other law, the National Assembly may advise the President on any matter which lies within his or her responsibility. Now, sometime this year, there was uproar in the public domain. It has come nearly a decade after the JANNEH Commission had been functus. But the considerations have morphed into the setting up of this here committee rather. And all in a plight to restore confidence of the public in the processes, operations of the JANNEH Commission. And might I add that the interests are the same. So in all respects, the committee's interests and your interests, Ms. Bensouda, are one in the same. I can assure you that. But I will contend with you that public perception does not matter if it comes after the fact. The Commission should have the ability to stand the test of time. I would allow you to react if you wish to, and move on to another point.
Thank you. I think I'm trying to understand or grapple with what you're saying, and I'm giving it some serious thought. On the one hand, I'm being told that my competence or my role is not being questioned. On the other hand, your use of the word taint suggests that my integrity is being questioned. And conflict is a matter of integrity.
Can we give context to the manner in which I use the word taint?
Anything that might have tainted the process. That's what you said.
Thank you.
And if I, in my capacity as lead counsel, was conflicted, in other words, if I, in my capacity as lead counsel, was conflicted with regard to part of the investigations of the Commission, then those investigations would be tainted. And that questions, that word goes to my integrity. I have no objection. Certainly, I can be questioned and my integrity can be questioned. There's no doubt about that. But as a professional, let me say this, that perception can be real, but it can be manufactured. And in this case, all the issues surrounding conflict were manufactured. The source of all the issues relating, all the allegations about conflict can be traced to only one person, and one person only. So I'm glad you said you will come to that, meaning I suppose you come to investigate the circumstances of the raising of the issue of conflict. But conflict is manufactured when it is not real, when it is not made in good faith, and when it is being used as a tool to exploit a certain situation. Because the circumstances in which the issue of conflict was raised is questionable, and we'll come to that. And as I said, those who stood to be harmed by the actions of the former president that were investigated, and those against whom adverse findings were made, were the people who were the most competent to challenge any aspect of the work that I carried out before the Commission. But no one challenged it, except no one raised the issue of conflict, except one person. And as I said, any public perception that arises from the fact that an allegation of conflict of interest was raised is manufactured. So as my answer is yes, public perception can be important and should be important to every public institution. And certainly, if it's within the mandate of this committee, they can probe into those issues. But as regards my work for the JANNEH Commission, I would say my work was exemplary. I behaved in keeping with my integrity as a lawyer of some over 30 years standing at the time. Now I am, of course, 42 years standing at the bar. I will not sacrifice my integrity and my reputation for one assignment. That is not possible. So I have nothing to account for as far as I'm concerned. I did my work professionally, no conflict of interest arose, and I dealt with every person that appeared before the commission with respect and fairly, and I advised to the best of my ability. The issue of conflict, as I said, is manufactured by a person who has an agenda which he has pursued. And I must, of course, put on record that I'm in court with this person, that's Mr. Kuran. We are already in court, and these are some of the allegations that he's still relying on, raised in his defense. But I do not have any problem. I'll put it out there for the record. So I do not have any problems discussing those issues. But I think it is necessary that the committee is aware. Thank you.